welcome, Dr. Yehuda, to Unbroken Veterans Podcast. We heard about you through CBS Sunday Morning. And so that's how we reached out to you and just kind of wanted to learn more about your research and how you kind of came to be helping veterans through PTSD.
Well, it's great to be here with you.
Thank you. Yeah. And so you've been doing over 30 years of research. And how did you kind of get into PTSD? Like, what made you want to research that? And
Yeah, in the I guess in the 1980s, I was a graduate student studying neuroscience, which
okay.
was then a new field, believe it or not. And we were investigating um, how the stress response works and how stress hormones affect the brain. And it was actually very interesting work, but it was all done in laboratory animals, rodents to be exact. And I really was interested in the topic of stress, but wanted to apply it to people. And so, towards the end of my graduate school career, I looked for opportunities to really take what I knew and apply it to people. And the diagnosis of PTSD was pretty recent in the 1980s. PTSD only became a diagnosis in 1980. And so I wasn't exactly sure what PTSD was, but I was very intrigued by the very first paper that came out of the Yale group showing that cortisol levels were lower in Vietnam veterans with PTSD compared to veterans that had other conditions like depression or paranoia. And that was really interesting because cortisol, as you may know, is a stress hormone. And the idea that Vietnam veterans with PTSD, this new diagnosis, would have lower cortisol levels really seemed to be a scientific mystery. And so I joined the Yale group and began to try to figure out why cortisol levels are low in PTSD. And that led to kind of 30 more years of
Wow.
research trying to figure out what is going on there
Yeah.
and whether any of what we learn in the neurosciences of PTSD can have application in treating veterans with PTSD.
Wow. It, and like through that process, like, because I noticed now you're a part of the VA, correct? Or
Yes,
like what?
I work in the VA, and a lot of the research that we have done has been done in the VA. I'm also professor of psychiatry at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. So those are two institutions that are affiliated.
Okay. And because did the VA always like were you always with the VA or did it kind of like adopt you? Like how did that kind of
Well, that's a good question. In 1987, I did my postdoctoral fellowship, which was officially a fellowship from the Yale Medical School. But my mentors, I should say, who were Doctors John Mason and Earl Giller, were at the VA. So
Okay.
that happens very frequently where you can be part of an academic institution, but also um, do your work at a VA, and then you become part of both institutions.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I just from watching that special, I mean, I think that it could really help a lot of veterans, and that's mainly kind of what our podcast is about. We're just trying to help people find alternatives and just help with the suicide rate. So, like, say somebody listening wanted to thought that would be a suitable treatment or wanted to get more information, kind of what would they do to find more information or get involved?
So I think you're referencing the MDMA assisted psychotherapy treatment that we talked about on the CBS morning show. Is that the one
Yes.
that yeah, just to but a general statement to make to veterans would be that if you're having mental health symptoms and you're thinking that you might be better off dead, or any of those really severe symptoms, um, it's very important to try to seek help. And the VA is absolutely a good option, or really any kind of um, care, because mental health symptoms don't generally go away by themselves.
Mm.
And um, we're now in a position in the field of mental health where we really do understand that veterans feel this way very often. Um, so there are a lot of treatment approaches. I think people have gotten frustrated in the past because they sometimes the treatments don't work fast enough, or sometimes they're not what people expect, or sometimes medications make people feel a little numbed out or give them side effects. And so it's frustrating, but it can take a while to kind of get in a groove where you um, like like your provider, and you like what's going on, and you like the therapy, and you feel like you're in the right place. Um, the promise of psychedelic assisted psychotherapies is that it really offers a new paradigm of care, a new way to begin to tackle the problem of PTSD and all the things that come with PTSD um, that make it really hard to live with. So, one of the reasons that it's so hard to get treatment for PTSD is that when you talk about what happened, you talk about the trauma that gave you PTSD, is often really distressing.
Mm.
There's a lot of, not only do you remember the fear, and you not only do you kind of have the fight or flight response when you get the memory, but you also have a lot of other feelings that are really overwhelming, like guilt or shame, or a lot of self-blame for how you could have done things differently, or that you weren't your best self. And you really develop this kind of, I call it an immutable narrative that nothing can get you off of. And you feel like you're just a bundle of anger and irritability inside, and it just feels like too big. It doesn't feel like anything will be able to crack through it. And then often when you go to therapy and you start talking about the trauma, it kind of gets worse before it gets better. People find it really, really distressing. They're like too overwhelmed with the distressing thoughts and the hyperarousal that comes with talking about the trauma. With psychedelic assisted psychotherapies like MDMA, the idea is to put people in kind of a good window of tolerance where they can start processing traumatic material, such as what happened during combat, with all of its edges, all the bad, the good, everything, the best of times and the worst of times,
Yeah.
and really do it in a way that is not too distressing, but also not too disengaging, because a lot of times veterans take medications that numb them out, so they can't really feel, which is their purpose. But
Right.
in order to do trauma work, you do kind of have to feel it, but you just don't want to feel it so much. You want to feel it just the right amount. And so what first attracted me to the idea of MDMA assisted psychotherapy was that it offers this combination of opening your heart, increasing compassion for yourself, and insight and introspection, kind of making you not too aroused and distressed, so that you can do the processing, which is done in the presence of two therapists who are with you the whole time,
Wow.
and before and after. And so you can really, really talk and process in a way where you can stick with it, because that's the problem that a lot of people have trouble with, just kind of sticking through the distress of it. And so I'm very, very hopeful. This, the treatment is in clinical trials, so we don't have the final word out yet, and the FDA hasn't approved it yet. But hopefully, this will be a treatment that will be available if the all the studies continue to show such positive results.
Okay. So it'd have to go through the rest of the studies and then get approved through FDA and before.
It's a long process, and I
Right.
think that, it's always frustrating when there's a long process. But there are research studies. Um, if your audience can search for MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, that website may be able to direct people to trials in their area. And we're just learning more about it. But the main thing that's really important is just this idea that I think people have a lot of trouble with, and that is that things can get better, because people feel pretty hopeless and they kind of spiral down into a place where they don't think that they can really be part of the world in the same way again. And it's such an important message that even though it's kind of hard to go to therapy, and it's hard to kind of find your groove in the therapy, that's the way to climb out of it. And I've met so many people that have been able to heal from PTSD. It's just a very important thing to be able to tell people. And I've seen cases where people were suffering so much, but that they were able to get to a much different place. So this idea of finding help is just a really important thing. And when you find help in a place that specializes in treating combat veterans, you also find a community of other combat veterans, which also is extremely healing and therapeutic for people to meet people and talk to people who have been through what they've been through. It's sometimes very hard when you come back to not be around people who served, because it's a different mindset and a different mentality.
Yeah, that's so true. Because like me personally and Sam, we deployed together to Afghanistan, and we were reserve soldiers. So it was really weird to come home and then you have, everybody goes to their different homes and you don't see, the people you were with for the last almost year. So I can see how that would be really relieving to find others that, are going through the same. That's awesome.
Well, thank you for your service. I just want to say that, because
Thank
it's
you.
a big thing to do when you don't have to. It's voluntary. And for anyone that just signs up and puts themselves on the line like that, I think we have to really pause and show gratitude for that. But yeah, you're absolutely right that, a lot of times people come home, they don't want to talk about everything they've been through, because it's just hard for people to understand. And
Mhm.
also the bonds that you make with fellow servicemen, people. Um, it's hard to explain that level of bond. It's hard to explain that you have left a family to go back to your family, and
Yeah.
what all that means, right?
That's so true. Yeah. And I'm sure that's part of the process too. It's like a loss, it's a part of you that you don't have anymore. So I'm sure that adds to it.
Um, yeah, I think it's just trying to find the right balance of being somewhere where you can carry things with you, but not be overwhelmed by them and still live in your present. Um, and so a lot of times people don't want to forget the past, because all the things that they did in in the combat theater were so very important. It's not, a lot of civilians have trouble understanding really this idea that it wasn't just awful stuff. Um, and how I figured that out was that I've spoken to so many veterans who sign up, they want to go back. They would go back again. Um, they wouldn't they wouldn't trade it necessarily, even though there are parts of it that are just pretty bad and can give people some pretty um, dark thoughts and symptoms. And so it's really just this idea of how to put it all together and know that all the things are part of you and that they can coexist, right?
Yeah.
And it's a process. It's a healing process. I think MDMA can help with it, but I think there are other ways to achieve that as long as you kind of formulate the goal that you don't want to eradicate the past. You just want to take it with you in a way that it can coexist with everything else.
Right.
Mm.
And yeah, and like you said, I mean, there's so many different ways. Like for instance, I try to kind of turn to meditation and like mindfulness, that kind of thing. And I guess like the MDMA would kind of be more the extreme, like the really tough cases, I guess. Would that kind of be, or
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm really glad you brought up mindfulness and meditation. And a lot of people find even yoga and just breath work, just concentrate on this moment of life, on your breath going in and your breath going out. I mean, people find that tremendously helpful because when you have PTSD, you're in the past and it's just hard to, activate that remote control, which is your brain, to change the channel and be, in the future is really hard. Planning becomes hard, but even being in the present is just a very difficult thing. And just this idea of breath in, breath out, um, can give you a release from the past. And
yeah,
just being in the moment can give you hope for a future moment, or just a different way to control your existence. I think people feel a little bit hijacked by their fear circuitry, or by the some of the changes in their brain and in their thought. So yeah, again, doing these kinds of things where you can be very centered in the here and now, um, can be very, very healing for people.
yeah. And I mean, that's for anybody. I mean, sometimes I feel like we all, we get so into life that we just don't take that minute to just be here, breathe, and just do nothing for a little bit and just be with our thoughts.
It's great advice for everyone, but people
Yeah.
with PTSD, um, just have a harder time controlling where they are, past,
Mhm.
present, future. When you have an intrusive thought that you did not invite, you
Yeah.
know, that is like your remote control deciding what channel to be on without you pushing it. You know,
Hmm.
what would our TV watching experience be like if we couldn't control the channel? And so we really want to be able to control what we think about when we think about it. And we want to control our responses to those things too. And so any kind of activity that gives us that control and focus, can be very, very helpful.
Yeah. If you just kind of talk through the process of the psychotherapy. So like that, I think it's like about a 3-day process. Is that correct?
Oh no, the MDMA assisted psychotherapy, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a 3-month process.
Oh, 3 month. Okay.
That's the PTSD is not a quick fix.
Hmm.
It didn't take you long to get it. It could take you a long time to heal from it. So when we're talking about a course of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, we're talking about preparation. The dosing sessions are 8 hours each, but the amount of talking done before and after is considerable. For the MDMA assisted psychotherapy trial, there are three 90-minute preparation sessions before the first dosing sessions, and then three integration sessions, also 90 minutes long, after every dosing session. You need a lot of time to process, um, what happens when you go inside your mind. Yeah, so you need a lot of time to really process and work with the material. You know, the psychologist Stanislav Grof said that psychedelics are to psychiatry what the telescope is to astronomy and the microscope is to biology. which I think is a really cool statement. Um, but you don't just stick with your eyes glued to the microscope or the telescope. Right? The real work of being a scientist involves working with what you see. And it's the same thing with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. The idea of really working with a therapist um, to figure out what it was that you understood when your mind went into a different place, when you achieve more of a relaxed or compassionate view about yourself. What is it that you learned? A lot of people come out of psychedelic journeys feeling like they're more part of the earth and the world, that they deserve to be here. And for veterans, that is really important because so many people feel, I mean, they just have this as a thought. It doesn't mean they're going to do anything about it, but they do feel, people would be better off without me, or the world would be better off without me. I'm a burden, or I suffer. And even if you don't have a plan or make a gesture, I mean, that is suicidal ideation. And it is, when you have a psychedelic experience, many people report that they don't feel that way anymore. They feel that they have a right to be here. They are part of the world. They are a child of the world. And that's a very, very important insight to have. It's this idea that you're as much a part of the world as the tree and the sky and the earth. And that it's justified that you're here, and that you might have to work to not suffer as much, but that's available somehow, and that you can move forward. So I think I was just very intrigued by the possibilities, because I think people do get this idea of feeling very overwhelmed and feeling very out of control. And one of the things that you learn in the military is how to control your weapon, how to control your movements. You're going to do an impossible thing. Control. So if you have all these thoughts and feelings and you don't feel you have control over them, that can really feel overwhelming.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I guess in a way it makes you feel that taking your own life is taking a piece of the world, and people are missing out on that part. But and anyone can hear that or say that, but to understand that. So I guess where your work is helping bridge that gap between the hearing it or understanding it and the actual emotional understanding.
Well, I hope so. It's not just my work. I mean, I think that there are people all over the country that care very, very deeply about veteran health and veteran physical health. And I've been around for a long time. I remember when Vietnam veterans were coming home, and they really did not have the kind of reception that veterans have now, which I think is really better. I think people, no matter what their political feelings are about war, I don't think that in general people take it out on the veterans. And so the question is, how can we form community so that people who didn't go to war or who are not part of military culture, how can those people support veterans and their families? And how can veterans and their families feel supported inside a culture that maybe doesn't understand so many of the unique features about serving? And it's something to really think about. So having forums like this where people can, get a veteran's perspective is really great. So I commend you for this.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, perspective is everything, and if they can't really see that, that's why talking about it is probably the best way of just helping everybody in the picture understand it and making that community bigger.
Has there been any need for anyone to follow up, kind of like go through it again or go through a smaller portion of it to help solidify what they went through initially?
Yeah, all of this, we don't know this yet. And this has
Okay.
been a big learning experience from the veterans that went through the MAPS phase 2 and phase 3 trial. It seems that the effects have been pretty enduring. You know, the experience really was a game changer. Was a real game changer for them, and has made a gigantic difference in how they live their life. And that doesn't mean that you'll never have another symptom again.
Hmm.
Very naive. But I think that you develop a different perspective, and that's what really therapy is about. And if you strip it down to its most basic thing, the idea of mental health therapy is, yes, to kind of improve symptoms, but to really get a different perspective about what happened to you and why you have the symptoms that you do have, particularly in trauma work. So, just waving a magic wand, taking a pill, reducing symptoms. I think there's a feeling that that's not enough, that there also has to be some real existential, um, you know, thought, some real idea about the meaning of all the things that happened, and what you make of it, um, in the here and now. Because a lot of things that might have felt, really right in the past maybe don't feel that way now, or you can't make sense of it now, right?
Hmm.
Um, and but you're here now. So how do you do all of that? So, this idea of trying to work with your own autobiography. Um, and also, life did not begin for many people when they joined the military. In fact, for nobody did life begin then. There was already quite a lot of life, that maybe even led up to the decision to. And I think with MDMA assisted psychotherapy, there are a lot of opportunities to explore some of those things, which I think are really important. You can't start at an artificial place. You have to start at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
About who you were, what you were all about then, what you're about now, and just in general how experience marks us, how experience gives us, not only passively marks us, but gives us, um, the opportunity to go forward in a very active way.
Wow. Yeah. We just had an interview not too long ago with Michael Surguru, and he was kind of talking about that as well. How a lot of veterans, like, they have had trauma in their past, and that's actually kind of what leads them into joining, either you becoming first responders or in the military. And so I guess it would be, you'd have to, you know, like you said, come up with that perspective and healing from the past and the trauma that you went through there as
Right.
well.
And there could be, I mean, that is absolutely true that a lot of people who have been traumatized choose professions where, number one, they can help people, but number two, they're also re-traumatizing themselves. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, like, what is that about for you? Um, just this idea of feeling that it's okay for me to traumatize myself as long as I'm saving someone else, or that I can bear it on behalf of someone else, or that I just don't even want to give myself time to think about what happens to me. I just want to go from one thing to the next fire, to the next crisis. So these things are highly individualized, and a lot of people feel that if they slow down and stop, and the past will come flooding in and will be very, very, overwhelming. So if we just keep going from one thing to another, that's what many, um, I Vietnam veterans who were just total workaholics. They just didn't want to stop for a second. And then when they retired and they stopped, many people got PTSD for the first time. And it was like, what do you mean you're getting it for the first time? because you just never let your mind go anywhere. You just kept it so busy, so that you would not have to, deal with the past. So I think we all use a lot of strategies to kind of get through our lives, but you got to do a reckoning eventually. Right?
Yeah.
Hang on to your mental health to be someone people want to be around.
We thank you for listening, and we hope you got something helpful out of this.
Right now, the best way to support us is to simply spread the word. If you know a fellow veteran who could use some resources to elevate their life, send them our way.
Until next time, remember to check your 0s, 5s, 10s, and 25s.